Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv. Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili Gianarakos. Vasili, what's going on, brother?
Doing really well. It's a big Sunday for Philadelphians. Obviously, Eagles in a huge game coming up later today. So good luck to them. From the Flyers' perspective, they're 5-4-1 in their last 10. So almost essentially 500 basically in their last 10 games. They did lose the last two games they played against some division rivals. So that's something to go over. But yeah, we do have a lot to talk about. Danny Briere's press conference, a ton of other news. So I'm doing well. A lot to go over. Going to be a good show. How about yourself, my friend?
Doing well, bro. Doing well. It's been weird to be out here and follow the hockey season, but it's been good. Been trying. I kind of ruined the score for myself a couple times, but I've been trying to go to bed and then first thing in the morning just rewatch the game without looking at the score, and then my phone goes off. And I look at all the tweets like, "Oh, Flyers lost." I'm like, and watching a game when you know the team lost,
it's not as enjoyable.
They scored one goal. It sucks because then once that goal happens, you're like, "Well,
nothing else is happening in this game." So,
all right, sorry about that, everybody. I had a little minor thing come up here, but yeah. So, it was definitely disappointing watching games that way, but it hasn't been all the games, so it's been cool. Luckily, there's only been a couple losses so far, so I didn't really have to deal with that too much.
Yeah, big losses, albeit, right? Like you want to get those games against the division rivals and have a better showing, but obviously you have to factor in they were 5-0-1 before losing those games. So there's going to be a little bit of a stumble. It can be tough. I mean, they still have yet to get over the hump and surpass a 3-game winning streak this season, and that's a little bit of a concern. But I think right now, we're in a spot for this Flyers team, and it's safe to say just how they've been this season. They've been very up and down, right? I would say they're its team at this point. They're just inconsistent. Like one week they could, look really, really good and compete with some of the best teams. Another week they might have a lull and, potentially lose to some bottom feeders or not look great against some of the, upper echelon teams. And I think that is just the struggle and kind of the progression of a young, growing, rebuilding team that the Flyers are right now, right? Like they are one of the youngest teams in the NHL still. And I think that's something a lot of people forget or, don't remember. But coming into this season, right, they were one of, if not, I believe, the youngest team in terms of under 25 players. So you just have to factor in there's a lot of progression happening here. And I think for people that are frustrated with just where the team is, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to kind of get into that as we go throughout the show.
For sure. So before we get into it, let me just let me do the usual spiel. Just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell for notifications on when we do release these episodes. For the audio versions, go to Spotify and iTunes, give us a rating and a following there as well. Again, that is the best way to support our show. And also, shout out to our sponsors, Jim's Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's Steaks at 4th and South. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. Also, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company. They will help make things easier for you and deal with all of the painful points of dealing with insurance companies and make sure you get the best claim possible. Again, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And also want to give a brief shout out to our partner, SportsSpider.com. Guys, if you're tired of searching multiple websites for sporting news, SportsSpider.com has you covered. They collect the latest articles, videos, and podcasts from around the web and organize them by your favorite teams. If you want to stay as up to date on our Philadelphia Flyers or the NHL in general, make sure to check out SportsSpider.com. The link is in the description. They are our partners. They do aggregate stuff from all over the internet. Our stuff is pinned at the top. Make sure to check out SportsSpider.com. Okay. So we'll start with a little bit of Flyers news. Again, this is all kind of after the fact, but at least we want to go through them as line items. We'll go into some detail about the games. We're going to talk about Danny Briere's press conference and some takeaways. We're going to talk about the power play and Rocky Thompson. We're going to talk about the rebuild status, and then we're going to do some NHL news in general that kind of affects the Flyers because they're both divisional teams. And then we're going to do a little bit of prospect talk at the end to end it off. So I'm just going to list the news out in general, and then we can just kind of go through it as a whole. So, something we didn't think was going to happen, Alexei Kolosov was officially sent down to the minors. Ule Lixell's tenure with the Flyers, also, at least recent tenure, ended with the Flyers. He went back to the minors, actually had 2 goals last night for the Phantoms. Anthony Richard got his call up. He's back up with the team. Obviously, we've seen him play in a couple of games. Rodrigo Abels was called up previously, obviously. It's funny, I wanted to say his name on our last episode and I did it, and then he was called up the next day. So Abels did call up. He did impress, so that kind of is why Lixell went back down. And then we found out that Zamula has sustained an injury. I don't think we fully know how
upper
long.
body ailment.
Yeah, but we don't really
according to the team. Yeah.
Right. So again, one of those vague answers. But Eric Johnson did step into the lineup and actually showed that he still got it to some degree. But yeah, okay, a lot of transactions there. Let's just talk about Kolosov.
That's probably the main one.
Yeah, that's the big one. A lot of people thought that this wasn't going to happen. I think a lot of people kind of suspect. Like I was even listening to Charlie O'Connor, and he thought that this was kind of, be strung along till it didn't make sense for Kolosov to leave. Danny Briere did mention this in the press conference, as he didn't see it an issue to send him down. And I feel like a lot of people want to think Briere is always lying, because there is a little bit of lying that is involved in being a GM. A little bit of holding back. Yeah. Let's put it that way.
It's professional sports, right, Yariv? You have to understand something, that a general manager, I think people need to know this too. A general manager is never going to go up there on the podium in front of the media and give away his full hand or what's happening. And if you think that is the case, then I think you have to reevaluate, right? It's like, right, if you were negotiating behind closed doors with a bunch of different teams, why would you, just on anything in general, why would you go out into a public sphere and then tell those other 32 teams what you're going to do or what you're thinking, right?
It's funny, though, because sometimes they are being blunt, and sometimes you have to read between the lines, but I do find that people have a really hard time understanding when the right time to read through the lines is and when the right time to just take them at their word are.
Critical thinking skills,
Right. And this one is understandable that people were speculating. I'm not going, because we know about the rumors surrounding Alexei Kolosov and the issues around it, but so Kolosov did go down to the minors. I actually kind of suspected that he would, and I think I didn't think he was up with the Flyers because he refused to go down. I actually think they literally didn't know what was going on with Ersson, and were worried that they were going to send Kolosov back down and then have to call him right back up and create tension for no reason. Or to create movement in Kolosov's life for no reason, right? So at the time made sense, but now as bodies and, Lawton's been away from the team and Paling's been out, they needed the roster space.
Yeah, their hand was forced, right? They obviously needed to bring somebody in at the forward position to kind of fill those holes that Lawton, being away for the family matter that he's dealing with right now, and for Paling's injury. So it was a no-brainer to send Kolosov, right? Because obviously he's not he is waiver exempt, doesn't have to go through waivers or anything, so there's really no risks. Whereas, with a guy like Fedotov, and earlier this season, that was a potential risk, right? A reason why they didn't send him down is he would have had to go through waivers. Obviously, that contract might have been something that stops teams from wanting to pick him up, but it just wasn't a risk that they were willing to take. And I think for Philadelphia and where Kolosov was at with his game, obviously he didn't look too strong in the last few outings. We saw kind of how he struggled just in terms of certain goals he was letting in. And I just think for him right now, where he's at in his development, to work on those certain things to get better at the NHL level, he's best served doing that in the AHL, right? You can get a lot more reps, a lot more frequent starts, because he's essentially going to be the starter down there. And I just think with how things have gone, there was always that risk of him going back to Belarus, perhaps. But I think even himself and his agent, right, they couldn't make the case to the Flyers that, well, Alexei's playing so well, why wouldn't he be in the NHL? Because obviously he was struggling. We could all see it. And even going back down to the AHL level, I believe his first game he let 5 goals in. So it's not like he went down there and is, starting off with the greatest performance as well. So I just think for everybody involved at this point, for him to kind of get his game back to where it needs to be on North American ice and kind of get some of those intricacies of the North American game that you might not pick up as a goalie coming from Russia, just certain things that he might need to adjust on that would work in the KHL but won't work against North American shooters. And this type of North American game, I just think at the AHL level, that's going to happen a lot easier for him, and he can work on that a lot easier versus at the NHL. And it's obviously the Flyers are seeing that too. I think the fact that you're not seeing anything come out of him being sent out in terms of, okay, I'm threatening to go back to Belarus. It's obvious that he is fine with going to the AHL and probably realizes that this is the best thing for my career going forward. So
Yeah, and he got some real time in the NHL too. It's not like we just
exactly,
buried him in the minors being
he got a
here.
taste.
And he's very young, Like it's not like we all felt like he was up early, and I also I believe that Cal Peterson's also injured, so I think they kind of saw it as like an opportunity. It's like, okay, we can call up another ECHL guy because Makaniemi's already hurt,
Yeah.
or we will allow Kolosov to play and not let these guys sit, because it's not good for goalies to sit too long, and
Especially for
we
an
might
extended
need
period.
Yeah, we might need you again back up at the NHL level, and I'm sure that was said to them or said to Kolosov, right? That
Yeah,
like,
well, you don't know with Urson, right? Like even though he's
or
come back
Fedotov
and
could get injured too.
that too, but Fedotov, even with him, I think the Flyers are in a situation right now where, like, if Fedotov's game, obviously the last game he played against the Islanders, there was a goal there. I think the third goal you would like to see him save. Like, if his game somehow in the next week or two drops off a cliff and he looks like the Fedotov we saw the first month or two, I guarantee you the Flyers will not hesitate to probably call Kolosov
Yeah,
back up,
I think
right?
you're right.
So
Yeah,
I just think this situation in general is in flux. It's really dependent on, firstly, can Urson stay healthy? Secondly, can Fedotov continue to play at least as an average NHL backup, which lately he has been. But I think it's going to be a situation we're kind of going to be monitoring throughout the season here, right? So
yeah,
we'll see what happens. But for now, I think at least Kolosov can play some games at the AHL level. And it's not like he was, looking like a legitimate backup at the NHL level when he was getting reps in lately. So why not get him, back to the AHL, get him to build that confidence up. So if you do need him at the NHL level, he comes in feeling good about himself and kind of ready for what's coming his way, right?
yeah. And then the other three guys you mentioned, like Sell, Richard, and Abels, it's all kind of tied in together again because of the two injuries they did experience. One, you want a center up here, so Abels was obviously called up because of that. And then, quite frankly, he looked better in his short stint in both games that he played over, or 3 games now, over Lixell. Lixell really didn't stand out too much. He's done better in other showings that he's been up. I'm sure it's not
Yeah.
the end of the road for him. He is a very good AHL player, but I think they wanted to get Richard back up here again. He's older, he's more developed, and Tortorella also talked about the loss of speed with Paling, and I'm
Yeah.
sure he wanted the speedster up from the minors as well. Didn't work out too well for the Flyers in the 2 games. Without the fourth line together, but I wouldn't say they were to blame. They actually, I thought, handled themselves very well. Abels looked like he, was going to score a couple goals a few times. Richard was kind of all over, on the odd man rushes. He was definitely creating chances. So I think it all made sense.
Yeah, I think for those call-ups, in terms of Abels, I actually like what I saw from him.
Yeah, same.
He looked like he fit in. To be honest, like he looked like a guy with his size that seemed pretty quick for his size. He was finishing checks, a couple of plays where he was trying to get the puck to the net. In a couple of sequences, I honestly I didn't mind that fourth line at all that they were kind of
Yeah,
running. I think for Richard, to be honest, if he wasn't injured, I think he would have been initially that call up instead of Lixell. So
yeah,
I think
you're
it's
probably
more of a
right.
reward for him just on how well he was playing earlier in the season. And at this point, right, like even against the Islanders game, I thought there was a couple of sequences where Richard had some chances and was actually, pushing offense and pushing offensive pressure. So I like what I've seen from Richard this season, in limited action that he's played. And I thought he's kind of been one of those guys when the Flyers haven't looked like a lot is happening for them offensively. He is pushing the envelope a little bit, and I think that is due to his speed. So I'm interested to see more from Richard. I do think that he's a guy that, if he had some more extended time potentially at the NHL that he might be able to carve a role out for himself. If it isn't with the Flyers this year, maybe another team takes a chance on him. But I just think that he has a guy with the speed that it's possible he could stick at the NHL level and be effective
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
estimation.
He has something for sure. Richard does. He has like an X factor, which a lot of AHL guys do not have anything that actually like kind of makes them stick out of the crowd, but
Yeah.
Richard does. So it tells me that like even if he doesn't end up playing for the Flyers long term, I have a feeling like maybe if he was on a worse team, like if he was on a
Yeah.
bottom end team, he'd be like a top 9 guy, like as a
Like a
fill
San
in.
Jose or something.
Yeah, like a fill in guy who can put up like 20 to 30 points in the NHL. Not exactly sure, but I do like Richard. And I like him on a call up basis for sure. So I guess the other one was Zamula, who I thought actually was playing pretty well as of late. We talked about it, how he wasn't really coming up much in any kind of negative capacity. I thought he was actually moving the puck well, and I thought he made some really good defensive plays. He's been very stable, especially when you compare it to the beginning of the season. And then Eric Johnson had to come back in, and it did not look like the guy's been sitting for 2 months. I gotta give him credit. His veterancy came through. He's physical in his showings. He had an assist as well.
Couple big hits, yeah.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, like, is he going to want to maybe go for another cup run? Why not? He's not going to net you much in return. Like, maybe he'll get you a 6th or 7th round pick.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little bit higher if the Flyers negotiate right. But, it's nice to have him there.
I think I think for the Zamula injury, it's definitely unfortunate because he was playing well, obviously, with Ristolainen. You saw the two kind of gaining that chemistry, so hopefully it's not something serious. They classify as an upper body ailment. I mean, with that information, it could really be anything, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But
Yeah.
it is refreshing to see Johnson come in and look solid and fit in pretty seamlessly. Like, I didn't think that he looked out of place at all, and he had a couple nice plays defensively, a couple big hits. So he's like your perfect 7th, right? Like I would say that Johnson can still slide and play a bottom pairing role pretty well and pretty effectively. Like, you're not going to rely on him more than 13, 14 minutes a night or anything. But I think for being a number 7 for a team for a cup run, I definitely believe that teams would be interested in having that type of depth and potential security. So I think the Flyers could probably move him. You're not going to get much back, probably like a 6th, 7th, 5th rounder, like you said, Yariv, but I think it's probably up to him, right? Like, if he wants to go somewhere, the Flyers will probably make that happen. But if he wants to stay here and kind of just finish out his career, they'll probably respect that as well. So we'll have to see where it goes. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the move at some point.
I hope he does want to move, because I would take the extra asset.
Yeah, it's a benefit for the Flyers, even if it is a 6th or 7th round pick. It's something you can materially look and say, hey, we signed this guy for a minimum, contract, and look what we turned it into, right?
Yeah, and I think he would be used in the same way the Flyers are using him, right? It would be like a playoff team. Maybe they'll carry him even as an 8. We could eat 50% of his contract too, so it would be a very minimal cap hit on whoever's taking him. Maybe to get that 5th, right? Eat 50% of that $1 million contract, and then he's really a bargain, and he's a leader. His leadership is fantastic. That has not gone away. So we'll see. Maybe the Flyers will be in the playoffs. They'll want to keep him. It's we're going to talk about it later, but our division definitely is not getting any easier this year.
Yeah, it's a logjam right now.
Yeah, and we don't expect really the Flyers to add. I think we can safely say that at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Flyers did lose 2 back-to-back to the New York teams, to initially 6-1 to the Rangers and then 3-1 to the Islanders, only netting 2 goals in both of those games and giving up 9. I will say this about the Rangers game. I don't think they played a 6-1 loss type of game. I think it got away from them at the end. Obviously, one of them was an empty net goal as well. I thought they actually
a bit.
Yeah, I think they definitely they didn't play well defensively like they have been, which is what really killed them in that game. But Shesterkin really, I think he kind of stopped that game from being even somewhat close. Like, maybe they would have lost that game 6-4 or something like that. But I think he kind of was the difference maker as the number, top 3 goaltender in the league. That does make sense. He definitely can. And the Rangers have been playing much better of late. They're not the same team that collapsed, right? They kind of gotten things in order. And the Flyers kind of lost their game a little bit in that one. The Islanders game, it was kind of frustrating, and Tortorella talked about it too, right? It was, they played really good 18 minutes. They were up 1-0, screwed up for about a minute towards the end of the period, and
Two
then
goals against, yeah.
and then 2 goals against, and then it's starting to build as like a frustration because over 2 games they put up 1 goal each. They had their chances in that game, and I will say, like, Michkov didn't have points in either one of those games. He had several phenomenal setups for guys who were not able to bury. He had a couple chances himself. So it's like,
chance.
Yeah, I feel like on the surface level, it looks like the Flyers collapsed in those 2 games. I wouldn't say that was the case. I don't think they played horrendous. I think they didn't play as well as they were playing, but hopefully it doesn't continue, right? Like, hopefully they catch it.
Yeah, like, I think now this is a pretty important spot for them coming up here after these 2, right? Like, I think the next game is kind of a must-win. It's crazy to say that. It's only, the end of January, but
we talked about it this stretch.
Yeah, they're 5 points out of a wild card. I mean, if they lose this next game coming up, I'm not exactly sure against who they're playing here.
Is it the Rangers again?
No, they play the Devils back-to-back.
Devils.
So, yeah,
Devils,
if they lose, it's a tough game. But, yeah, if
they division games.
If they lose, let's say these games coming up, they have 2 games against the Devils, 1 against the Islanders. They at least need 4 out of the 6 points, I would say, because they're 5 points out of a wild card spot. If you lose, these 3 games coming up, like, there's a potential those teams ahead of you could win 3 games. Then you're, like
now you're chasing, you're back where you were.
Like 8 points out, exactly, right? So, like, these games are important coming up, and that's why kind of losing these 2 are frustrating, because if you did get 2 out of the 4 points, you're still, instead of being 5 points out, you're 3 points out, right? So it kind of puts you in a situation that's a little tough because you got teams to jump ahead of you. But back to the 2 games in general, like, I think for the Rangers game that they lost, like, it's kind of just one of those ones where you burn the tape. Like, they didn't play as bad as the 6-1 loss. A couple things go wrong, a couple deflection goals where you want to see them box guys out a little bit better in front of their own net, which they did not do. That's just one that gets away from them. You got to kind of burn the tape on that one, because before that game, they're 0-1. Like, they're kind of rolling here. And it's not like the Rangers have been bad as of late. Like, everybody thinking, oh, the Flyers should beat the Rangers. They're kind of collapsing. They were collapsing, but they're 7-0-3 in their last 10. So they're actually playing really well of late. They were kind of on a heater similar to the Flyers, right? So they are the better team. Shesterkin has little bit more frustrating because they actually create a lot more chances than the Islanders in that game in terms of scoring chance creation. And they create, more chances in terms of, like, high quality danger areas. So they had better chances to score in that game. They just couldn't solve Sorokin. And, I would argue, right, like, he's one of the top 5 goalies in the league as well. So if there's going to be, goalies that kind of stonewall you, for it to be Shesterkin and Sorokin, that's not something that is very surprising to me. And we know the Flyers aren't necessarily a team that is a high-powered offense. So when you're facing goalies of that caliber and you are, a team that can struggle to score at points, and we've seen it this season, it's not surprising for me to see them kind of only get 1 goal in both games against high caliber goalies like that. I just think in those situations, the Flyers need to realize that maybe we need to get more shots on net, pucks to the net in volume, in those types of situations where, hey, like, we're having trouble scoring, let's try to throw everything to the net, where I think they weren't doing that, and maybe kind of looking for perfect plays or, like, perfect type of passing plays to beat a goalie like Sorokin. That's kind of where the frustration sinks in. You can get in your head a little bit. So I just think with the Flyers, they just need to put these 2 in the rear view mirror real quickly if they want to kind of stay in this wild card hunt. We'll ultimately see, right? Like, this next stretch of 3-4 games is going to probably make or break their season, and we're probably going to come back after this either or and say, hey, the Flyers are still well within this wild card race, or if they lose these next 3 games, they're going to kind of, be out of it and focus on the draft. So we'll see where it goes, but it's an inflection point for sure coming up.
Yeah. For sure. It was very disappointing to see, because they were building so much momentum, and we talked about how important this run was going to be. And the fact that they kind of lost to two of the most important games, it's a bummer, the in division games. But that's been this whole season, and again, that's why we kept talking about this. Is this season was built with insurance, so you should be able to watch these games. be disappointed in the loss and frustrated with the loss, but understand that it's okay because this is all part of the process, and we're not in a phase where these games are life and death for us. We're not quite there yet, even though they might feel like it at times, and we want to make the playoffs. There's a benefit to not making the playoffs too, and
still a very young team, and you have to factor in like today, if the Flyers were to draft, I believe they'd have the 8th overall pick. So like they're this close to the playoffs, but they also have a top 10 draft pick technically.
Yeah.
So
yeah, 100%. So let's touch on Danny Briere's press conference. We're not going to go through every little line, but I do have 4 points. 4 points to talk about that came out through there. So the first one is almost a 1-for-1 of our conversation of what we had prior to the press conference,
which is hilarious.
Yeah, of Rasmus Ristolainen at the trade deadline. Obviously, like a big topic, so not surprising that it came up in the press conference at all. But I gotta say, I mean, Danny Briere said to you guys exactly what we said to you guys on this podcast, and you can choose not to believe that or not. But I very much do. And you saw Vasili's like a little more in favor, or I think you agree with me, but you also see an opportunity to move him still, and think that it's not like unlikely. Where I think it is unlikely that they do move him. Well, you see I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you see an opportunity to move him.
I think there's a possibility for it to happen. Will it happen? I don't know. I just think it's going to depend more on what the offer actually ends up being at the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Which is a very reasonable thing to say. With me, I think I just don't think the Flyers are very interested. And looking at Briere's statements, one, he talked about how he's not a rental type of player because he's on contract. He also said that he's not being shopped. And then the biggest takeaway is that, they have difficulty with the idea of replacing him, and that they feel that their lineup will miss him. And this was kind of my biggest reasoning behind that, is that like I look at what's available and everybody keeps wanting to pencil McDonald in. I'm not so sure that McDonald's going to be ready next year, or if he's even going to be as good as Ristolainen.
Still a very young defenseman. Yeah.
Right. I don't know if he could even play ever a top 4 role in the NHL. Like he might just be a bottom pair.
And even defender. People saying, oh, well, Bonk's on the way. Like the kid is yet to leave junior hockey. So to kind of like pencil him into a top 4 role right out of juniors, I don't think that's fair to him.
Yeah.
Or his development path, right? Because we know for defensemen that how likely is it to see a defenseman, step out of junior hockey right into the NHL and actually be effective at it? It's pretty rare to see that.
Usually he's probably starting in the minors. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Guys coming out of junior need, seasoning some chance to get ready to the pro level and kind of acclimate themselves. So I totally understand your point here.
Yeah, 100%, dude. And not only that, I look at a guy like Risto, and I really don't see this defense being sustainable kind of without him right now. Like it's a very young group of defensemen, and I still believe like, and people can question the Nick Seeler thing because we just re-signed him, but people wanted to trade Ristolainen immediately after we signed him. So it's like, what is the difference here? I'm not sure the Flyers are in a rush to trade any of them. I do think they're probably more open to moving Seeler, even though the return is not going to be anywhere as nice as a guy like Risto. But I do think about next year, and I'm not sure if next year they're going to trade him or whatever, or if they're necessarily not going to trade him this year. I have no idea for sure. I just go off my instincts. But I do look at the fact the salary cap is going up substantially, and the type of contracts that are going to be handed out. You look at that 1 year remaining, on top, he's got 2 years remaining beyond this year.
It's an attractive asset, 100%.
And then all of a sudden, relative to other contracts that are being given out this summer, you start looking at Risto as a bargain.
Yeah.
And his value might even, again, you can make that case, I guess, somewhat this trade deadline because they know the cap's going up. But still, like relative to the cap, he's going to be a very nice contract. And all of a sudden, it's not like we're definitely not eating any of it, and we want a first round pick and a good prospect. That's most likely the ask.
I mean, I think it's pretty reasonable in terms of the ask if you were to trade him. And it's just because think about the way he's played. Firstly, like he's a guy that's taking minutes in the sense that, hey, like if there's an injury, he could step up and probably play top pair for a team,
sure,
and fit right in. most teams I would imagine are contenders that would be interested in trading for Ristolainen. They're going to probably slot him in on that second pair in a
Yep.
second pair role, but he could play up in the lineup, and that's valuable to have because
Depending
not
who their
necessarily.
number one is,
Yeah, and not necessarily every guy you get in that bottom pair type of role can step up and take those minutes. Like Ristolainen played 4 years, over 20 minutes a game with the Sabres. So he might not be able to handle it well, perhaps. You might not want him to play every night in that situation, but he can do it, and he's
He's
done it
been
in the
doing it
past.
this year.
Yeah, exactly, right? So I just think for the Flyers, very attractive asset. What you bring up in the sense that, hey, expiring deal next season, does that make the return
Well,
value go up even more?
I think he'd still have a year left beyond that. But again, with relative to the cap going up substantially, he starts to become a bargain over 2 years, something you cannot get in free agency. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah,
not going
no,
to be able to find a 31-year-old defenseman signed at 5 million that can play in your top four. It's going to become a thing of the past because the cap is going to go up substantially over the next 2 years. He's not going to be this. Oh, it's $5 million. It's going to be like, oh, it's just $5 million.
yeah, so he's after this season, he has 2 seasons left. He'll be a
Right?
UFA in
Exactly.
the 2027 season. So no, 100%, right? Like basically if you were trading for him in a situation next season, it's almost like he is a rental for you for 2 seasons. So it's like you're getting a guy that you're giving up assets, but it's not a traditional rental in the sense that, oh, he's a UFA. I still get an extra year of him. So I think that makes him a little bit more valuable, in my opinion,
Short term.
if you were to wait the year, because you got to think, right? Like if you're a contending team and you're trying to trade for Ristolainen, it's probably not just a 1 year window you're aiming for. So he
It's
could be a
2 3
value.
years.
That's what
Yeah.
I mean. He could be a value to you years beyond the one season. So typically when these contenders are looking to make these trades, usually it's guys that are on expiring deals. So I do think that if you waited the year and he actually only has a season left when you traded him. So let's say you trade him next year, like the 2025-26 season, for example. And he just has 1 year left for 26-27. Then it becomes a deal where you might even be able to get more. So if you're going to trade him near the Flyers, I think next season is probably like the prime time to do it. But my thought process and the reason why I think it still is possible is you just never know what's going to happen, in the sense that you got to see what the trade market's like, right? I don't think there's a lot of defensemen right now that are available, that are really like high profile, or guys that are like the same
No,
skill set
Risto's
as.
probably top of the list.
That's what I mean. The same skill set of him. So you got to think about like what are teams going to be calling, willing to say if it becomes a bidding war. So if you're Briere, I think their prerogative is to keep him. And the reason being, obviously, is because if you trade him, you got to replace him. And if you're looking at what this team's trying to do going ahead, I just think the Flyers are going to they're in that spot. We're going to kind of talk about it. I just think they're either going to look to start to try to be that team making the playoffs consistently next season. But if not next season, the season after that, if you're going to be trying to do that, if you remove Ristolainen, it's going to become increasingly more difficult to try to be that team, because he's a guy you're going to need, right? Or a player of his ilk you're going to need. So if you trade him, you're going to need to replace him nonetheless, right? So that's where I kind of think the Flyers are looking to hold on to him. But right, you just got to see what the offers might be too. So I think Briere kind of is totally cognizant of that, and he's open to the fact that, hey, if some sort of bidding war comes my way and a team comes to me and kind of really overpays for him and blows our socks completely off, I think they would listen to it and potentially be receptive to it. But it would have to be a massive overpay, because I think Briere is obviously understanding that this team is looking to start picking up and becoming a perennial playoff team in the next few seasons here. And if you do trade Ristolainen, you're just going to need to replace him anyway. So you're basically doing yourself a disservice to trade him now, only to replace him in a couple of years if you're trying to kind of be that playoff team soon. So
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll see. Again, I understand the argument to being made. I just see it more as a next season type of thing. Especially when you have to start making room for
yeah,
guys. When you
for sure.
have Bonk in the minors, when Zamula's contract is nearing towards the end, that's another guy who might
And
be
it's
moved.
less of a risk though, too, right? Like it's less of a risk to wait a year. It's not like you still don't have him under
Well,
contract. It'd be different. It'd be different to be like, oh, his contract's expiring now, we're not trading him. That would be a stupid move, very idiotic. You'd want to, get some sort of return on your asset. The fact that you could wait a year, you could internally see, oh, how's Hunter McDonald's development doing? How's Oliver Bonk doing in his first season in the AHL? If these guys, let's say, are coming along nicely, that might give you even more incentive in a year from now to say, hey, these guys are coming along nicely. Ristolainen, a year's shaved off his contract, the return's going to be even better. Let's make the move
I
on this now,
I
right?
guess the
So
contrarian thought is like maybe this is his max value. I don't think that that's the case, but I can understand why people
I
say that
no,
because
I
of
could
his
see
injury
it.
history as well.
I think the
Um,
only concern would be the injury history that he gets hurt and you can't trade him. I just think there's nothing that I've seen from him in his tenure since he started here that leads me to believe he won't continue to either stay at this level or get better because arguably I think under Bradshaw and Tortorella,
he's
even
gotten
this
better every
season,
year.
yeah, exactly. He's just getting better. So I just think until I see him drop off a cliff under this coaching staff, I can't ultimately like point to next season and be like, well, he's gonna get worse. Like I think
Yeah.
there's two sides to the coin, right?
Yeah, I think this is the best he probably will be, but I think he can sustain this for another 2, 3 years. So,
He's in
um,
his
I,
prime right
I
now,
just,
for sure.
yeah, I just don't think they're in a humongous rush at this point. It's possible they move him to trade deadline. It's absolutely possible.
Yeah,
But like Vasily was saying, if the return is right,
bidding
but
war, in my
but
opinion.
they're not getting rid of guys just to get rid of them. That whole concept, in my opinion, does not exist with the
Yeah.
Flyers.
Well, he's playing a valuable part for you. And even if you want to say, like, oh, the Flyers are 5 points out, there's no way they're going to make the playoffs. And I mean, realistically, when you look at how many teams are between them and the wild card race, you can probably look at that and say, hey, the chance of them make the playoffs, it's pretty slim at this point, but we'll see what happens.
I mean, they still
But
got plenty of time, though.
no, yeah, they got time.
They got plenty of time to collapse too. But
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like, if you look at it that way, right? Like, I just think like there's no rush to trade these guys, especially when they're under contract. Like,
right, exactly,
why would you force yourself into something right now when the potential is the return could be better in a year from now?
or at least
I
the
mean,
same.
yeah, and also, I mean, why would you rush to trade a guy now when like realistically, let's say he has a better season next season. I know it's not, something that everybody's thinking could happen, but what if he plays even better next season? You can even maximize it more, right? Like that's a possibility too. So
Yeah,
I think all
or he
things are on the
proves it for
table.
2 years in a row that he does this.
That's what I mean. I think all things are on the table. I think the Flyers will be listening if there are offers, but I just think for this to happen this season, it's going to have to be something where, first of all, teams are bidding against each other because there's just so slim pickings on the market. And second of all, it's going to be like first round pick, second round pick, prospect that you like. And like that's probably what it will have to be for them to let go of him. I think if it's just the first round pick right now, the Flyers will not be interested in that because you got to think it's going to be a late first round pick. Is the value really like, are you really recouping the value that he's worth? Because a late first round pick, the chances that it turns into a player like Ristolainen is slim. They might
Right,
not even be an
just like
NHL
the
player.
chances that McDonald would turn into Ristolainen is also slim.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, the other point he brought up was goaltending, and he did admit that goaltending, obviously was not a strength of this team, but he also, cautioned people to be like, and this is something we talked about on this podcast, is that yes, the goaltending has not been good, but the team also didn't play that good defensively in front of them. So it kind of exacerbated the problem. And it was kind of like a catch 22 where the defense wasn't playing good and then collapsing because the goaltending wasn't good. I just think he did a good job kind of defending both sides of the argument there. People might not like it because it's like he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth, but I do think that was also the truth. And obviously the injuries to Ersson played a big role in it, but when the team plays solid defense, even bad goaltending can look better. And I do think it was a combination problem for this year. Not just,
Yeah,
I don't think they played as well defensively as they did last year.
no, I think the goaltending definitely there's been issues with it. It hasn't been perfect. I mean, we can all agree that there's been times where Fedotov's looked real bad in the net, times where Kolosov's looked real bad in the net, even some games where Ursson's looked really bad. But there has been games too where the goaltending's played well and the team hasn't been able to score enough goals to help them out or hasn't been able to give them enough run support. So it's not all been on the goaltending, right? Like I think just to point at goalies specifically and say, oh my God, if we had Igor Shesterkin in there, we'd be firmly in a playoff spot. Who knows if that's the case, right? Like the defense always plays a huge factor into it as well. So I just think for the Flyers, like if you look at overall goals allowed this season, you can't just put on the goaltending, right? Like their defensive stats this season, is 28th in the league, 3.36 in terms of goals allowed. Like there's been stretches we've seen where the team has just not been that great defensively, and they've kind of haven't been helping their goaltenders out, right? And
Yeah,
look at
look
the
at the game
Rangers.
against the Rangers game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah.
was gonna say. Like that's a game where they probably should have lost 3-1, 4-1, but just some of the way that they're playing defensively ends up making it a 6-1 game. And you look at it and you're like, well, the goalie must have been terrible, but that's not doesn't tell the whole story, right? Like
Yeah.
I think there's been at least with this team a big crux to them defensively this year. To be honest, has been deflection goals against. I think they've had a real tough time defending against deflections. And in certain games where I think teams have played them and have gotten multiple deflection goals, we kind of see them collapse and they're not able to handle that type of offense that teams are bringing forth. Like how many games have we seen this season where a team has kind of set up shop in front of their net, the defense hasn't boxed them out enough, and they're getting multiple deflection goals and then they lose by a multiple goal, range. I think it's happened multiple times this season. So
Yeah.
I think that's an aspect if you look at the Flyers defense where even though Brad Shaw's done a good job, you probably want to see the team maybe get more physical in front of the net. Goes back to your Ristolainen point. Subtract Ristolainen. How bad did those deflection goals look, or how many more deflection goals against are you even seeing, right? So
Yeah.
it all ties in, but I think in terms of the goaltending, like it hasn't been something you can look at and say, "Oh my God, they've been great all season." But I think they've been adequate enough when you needed them to, especially recently with Urson and Net. Like he's given them a chance more often than not to win versus lose. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that he brought up, which is, in my opinion, I think the most interesting point in the conversation, is he was talking about the prospects, specifically Bonk and Luchenko and Team Canada, and he definitely questioned the usage of both of them. One, in the usage how Bonk was used in general, where he specifically said that the team didn't understand why Bonk was playing the role that he did, and then and how that's not how they would use him, and he was used as like a power play quarterback, and I completely agree with them. And if you look at the way Canada, uh, the way they performed this year, their evaluation, the fact they kept certain guys off the roster, that team was a mess.
yeah.
And then, in my opinion, even more importantly, Luchenko, where he said Luchenko was the best skater on the team. I think
Maybe in the tournament.
I
Yeah.
think he's the best skater in the tournament. I think people can find ways to argue that. I think that's a load of crap. The fact that he was the best skater on the Flyers, even the best young skating players, they usually show up in the NHL and guys burn them. I think Luchenko is a special player. I know people still want to pencil him in as a number two. I think you really have to give it time with somebody like Luchenko. Again, remember, he's very young for his age group. And I think it was important that he kind of said that, because we also were shocked. Every time he was on the ice, he was winning puck battles. He was clearly one of their most effective players, and they weren't using him. And it showed that the coaching didn't really know what they were doing, and they had another very disappointing tournament. And I don't really know much about the coach. I don't even remember his name. The coach,
Dave Cameron.
Dave Cameron.
He wasn't that great when he was the coach of the Senators in his one stint in the NHL.
Yeah, I was going to say he definitely shouldn't be the coach of Team Canada.
I think I'm not exactly sure who he coaches in the OHL. I think it might be the Ottawa 67s, but that team also isn't a good team in the OHL. So I don't really know how he became the coach. Anyways, like old boys club in terms of Hockey Canada
Relationship. That's what I was going to say.
Unfortunately, right? Like that's just how it is sometimes. I would say, yeah, that was a really interesting piece for me in terms of, Bonk and Luchenko and kind of Briere's thoughts on it. I think everybody in Canada was kind of wondering what Dave Cameron and the World Junior staff were doing. So it's not, Briere's not the only one who's puzzled. It's all of Canada.
Yeah.
Who doesn't kind of understand what that, staff's doing in that situation. I think for Bonk, it makes no sense because they haven't started out as the PPQB. They realized 6 games into the tournament, this guy has been in the bumper for London and finally put him there. And then, he ends up kind of scoring a goal and it starts working the power play. I'm like, do you guys do any pre-scouting or what was going on?
I don't know what's going on there.
It's really puzzling.
They also didn't use Bjarnason at all.
At all, yeah. Which is, I could understand if they have him penciled in as the number 3 goalie. The number 3 goalie is usually not going to get it.
He outperformed the other two in the play-ins.
Yeah.
Well, no, in the play-ins.
Yeah,
and he's the oldest.
Yeah, so once again, another one that's puzzling.
Didn't even use him once.
Yeah, I didn't even dress, I don't think, as a backup, which is weird. And then Lachenko's obviously the big one. Like, first of all, the kid made the NHL.
That
I don't know if there's
no
anybody
other
else
right.
on that team that made the NHL. I don't believe so. So
Yeah,
it's strange to
Chuck,
me.
what's his name? Would have, but he didn't make the team.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Chuck. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting is just like you have a guy that made the NHL level and you're playing him in a fourth line role on a world junior team when there's guys that weren't even close to sniffing the NHL level. So you have to think in terms of like Luchenko's game from a maturity standpoint, not albeit, right? Like a maturity standpoint, the skating, the fact that he's already played against NHL competition this year, you would think you'd want to utilize that
The fact that
against
he's
you.
probably the best defensive player forward on the team.
Yeah, you think you want to utilize that, right? And try to like put him into a situation where he's getting a lot more ice time just because he's played against men before, he's played in the NHL before. Maybe he can use that experience to his advantage in a tournament against 18-year-olds and 19-year-old kids. Obviously, the coaching staff didn't see that.
Man, I
I
didn't
think
see a
everybody
lot.
feels I think everybody feels the same way as Briere here. I thought it was really funny to see him call them out. I think it's
Yeah.
warranted. And I think it's also a good way to pump up your prospects' tires. Like I can imagine that after a tournament like that, Lachenko himself's probably wondering like what's going on. Like I made the NHL this season. I went to this tournament. I'm the first line on my team in the OHL, and I come here and I'm getting limited usage, barely even playing. I'm sure he's wondering what's happening. I'm sure Bonk as well is
Uh,
wondering what's happening with his usage. So I think it's reinforcing for them to probably hear from their GM
I'm sure they
of
told
their
him that.
NHL team. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
reinforcing that they're probably saying, hey, we still love you guys as prospects. We love where your game's going. We're not sure what Team
What
Canada
was
was
going on
doing.
there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but keep doing what you're doing, and I think it's a smart thing for Briere to do that to kind of pump up some of
Yeah.
his most notable prospects' tires.
Absolutely. And then the last point is about finding a center solution. He talked about
Interesting topic, and it's
yeah.
good on Kevin Kurz to bring the question up because obviously it's been something that the fan base has been wondering about for a while. So
Yeah. Look, and he talked about how, and we know like a guy like JT Miller can be thought of, right? Who could be an option for the Flyers, but you look at his contract, we brought him up on this podcast, and we said when we looked at the contract, we said, well, that doesn't work. And
or
that
makes
that
sense. Yeah.
is the position the Flyers kind of find themselves in. And then even a guy like Mikko Rantanen, who, is in his prime, is going to demand a $13 to $14 million contract in his next, and it's going to be a max deal, right? An 8-year deal. That also doesn't really work for the Flyers timeline. I guess you could suspect to flip Konechny for him in that case, and we'll talk about that later. But like again, you just and then you think about the fact that Konechny himself is on a 95-point pace. And you kind of like look at like the options, and he talked about the difficulty of the situation. I think a lot of people kind of like threw their hands up and were like, well, what are you going to do? It's impossible for you. I think people need to get this mindset out of their head that first line centers are only found in the top 5 of the draft, or that you have to go out and get them and sign them to a max deal. A lot of these guys that are first round picks were available in other ways, or they were not drafted. We have already gone. I don't know how this stuff continues to perpetuate without anybody actually doing their research, but it does. We have gone. You guys can go to our podcast from the offseason. We have gone through all of the previous drafts, and we have proven to people
The
that
last one
top
was
line
like 10 seasons. Last 10
yes,
seasons.
that the top line centers around the league can absolutely be found in the second round, at the end of the first round, in the third round. It becomes a lot more difficult to find them there, but it is not an impossibility. It is no guarantee that the guy you take at the top of the first round is going to be a number one center. You can
Nolan
point to the
Patrick. That's all I'm going to say.
well, yeah, you can point to the Nathan McKinnons. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but Nathan McKinnon is like he's an outlier. Like a lot of these guys, and he was taken first overall. Sure, if you take first overall, but we picked Mitch Kovitz 7. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like that, it was lucky that fell to us. We don't even know what we have with Luchenko, and I thought it was very interesting. And then to end it here, and I'll let you comment. He also brought up Morgan Frost, and this again, I kind of am under the mindset that Frost's tenure as a Flyer is coming to an end. But I think Briere is trying to be a little more reasonable. He's like, when you're looking out there and you can't really find number one centers, and then we have one that's like not a number one center, but he's a point producing center. He can move the puck. He's like, it's pretty hard to find centers right now as it is. So maybe the Flyers aren't looking to move away from Frost. My whole thing wasn't so much that they wanted to throw Frost away, is that like I just don't know what kind of contract can be worked out between the two. Maybe it'll be a 1 year deal, but I think Frost is going to want more money, and I don't know if the Flyers are really that interested in giving him a considerable amount more money. And I think like something's going to have to break there. But he did bring that up as well as a defensive Frost, and then he also, and I'll lump these together, even though he's not a center. He talked about Farabee, and he knows that people have been talking about trading Farabee, and he's like, you want to be really careful when it's a guy who's 24 years old who, is 24 and is learning and growing, and it shows you where his mindset is. It is a lot closer to what Vasili and I talk about on this podcast, that we look at 24, 25-year-olds as young players in the league. And we don't look at 21, 22-year-old prime age players, because it's not real. And there's plenty of information to show you that that's not real. So, and those are two guys who, considerably you could package away for a center, right? Who could net you what you're looking for. Them with a first round pick might get, could get you a guy like JT Miller, right? At least a guy of that caliber. So what are your thoughts, Vasili?
Yeah, I think with the center conversation that kind of brought up or got brought up to Briere, and that question that Kurz mentioned, I think it was an interesting one. Like, obviously, everybody knows that the Flyers need a center, right? Like, I think it's easy to scream for it now and say, hey, like, we need to get it now. We need to make the trade now, or like has to happen this offseason. I just think the Flyers need to be careful in what they do. Like, I'm kind of almost parroting like Briere. But it is true that once, you trade away these valuable assets you have, once you do that, you're kind of locked into this guy that you're trading for. You're kind of locked into this move, and you have to make sure that it's the right one, right? So I think for the Flyers, they just want to make sure that they're, doing their due diligence. They're not missing out on something they might have in-house. I think that's a interesting thing to look at with the Frost situation. Like, I think Briere probably looks at Frost and sees a lot of himself. Like, Briere had 4 or 5 seasons in the NHL before he really broke out and had a 60-point season, 30 goal plus season. Frost is going to be like his 4th or 5th year now where he's kind of with the team full time. He's yet to kind of have that success, but this might be his first year. Like, he's got 11 goals right now in 46 games. This might be his first season where he hit that 20 goal plateau, and who knows where he goes from that point. So I think there is a level of, hey, we've developed this guy so much already to this point. Let's just wait a little bit longer and kind of see what happens. And I do understand that, because you've already gone through it so much with the Frost at this point. So why not just take that extra year now? Maybe sign him for 1 more year. Maybe next year is kind of that final season that you're giving him, and really see what it is, because you never know, right? Like, let's say he was to go somewhere else and becomes a 25, 65, 70 point guy, you're going to really regret it, right? So I think Briere kind of mentions that to kind of say, hey, hold your horses. We don't want to just make any rash decisions. But I also get it from the fan base's perspective that they're a little bit frustrated that a move hasn't been made yet to this point. And we get that.
And we talked about a shakeup is needed to some degree in this offseason.
Yeah, exactly. I think the main thing, though, is that, like, people can't, like, you can't look at it and say, hey, like, oh, the Flyers are going to make some big shakeup move, like, in the middle of the season. Like, I know we see the Avalanche and Carolina do that, but it's completely different circumstances to where the Flyers are. Like, I just think that when you're looking at a centerman and potentially, acquiring even a stopgap, like what he said is correct, right? Like, there could be an older centerman that fits, like, their timeline or what they want to do, or potentially might make sense. It's just not the time for those conversations to happen right now, right? Like, who knows who's going to become available in the offseason, or who knows maybe what center that's 28 or 29.
When teams are restructuring.
Exactly. Like, no team is restructuring right now. Like, who knows what's going to happen to, let's say, a team that's a playoff team. Maybe they've made the playoffs for 3-4 seasons. They're not getting over that hump. And they think to themselves, hey, this is going to be a tough decision for us, but we want to trade this guy. It's been a major part of our team. We need to make a shakeup so we can get over that hump in the playoffs. And a guy you thought that might have not been available 6 months ago could be, and it might make sense for you. So that's why you don't want to rush into certain deals, especially where the Flyers are at, because it's not like they're trying to contend right now, or their window to contend or even win is right now. So let's say you were short-sighted and spent your assets because you want to make a move right now, and you wasted those. And then something that's even more,
more of a plausible situation comes up for you down the line in 6 months, and now you can't make that trade because you made a short-sighted decision. You know what I'm saying, right? So it just, I think they need to be calculating what they're doing, and I do think that this summer is a really good opportunity for them, and I think Briere is kind of hinting that at that in a sense that, hey, like, we have 6 draft picks coming up in these first 2 rounds. I can, not to say guarantee, but I feel like it's highly unlikely they make all 6 of those picks. And it's pretty obvious, if you've followed the league for this long, teams that have that much of draft capital usually use it in a trade of some sort. I don't know what it's going to be, but I would imagine that all those picks do not get made. So I would say to fans that are, frustrated here, like, it's a point in time where this team is trying to make a calculated move to set themselves up to be a contender for the future. So you don't want to make a short-sighted decision. So I think Briere is just looking and trying to assess and see, okay, what can I do here coming up that's going to make this team a competitor for years to come, not just get them a piece that's going to be a short-term situation, short-term solution, right?
Yeah, yeah, and potentially take on a bad contract that you're going to have to deal with in a year or two when the team is good. All right, and then we're going to talk about the power play real quick here. So, the power play still sucks.
Not great.
And we were talking about this offline, like, how long is Rocky Thompson's tenure really going to be here? Again, it's pretty rare. We've talked about this over and over again, but it's pretty rare that a assistant coach is fired under the current coach. Usually they stick with their guys. I do think about this, though, since the PK has struggled, does it buy Thompson a longer leash? Because maybe they think, okay, at least it's not the worst in the league. And look, even Shaw's, who's a very good defensive coach, and we know that for multiple reasons, that the PK has struggled now. It's not as bad, right? It's 19th, somewhere between 20th and 18th at all times. Is that buying him a little bit of a leash to be like, hey, this is kind of up and down thing? But, if they finish again at like 30, we both are kind of like, you got to do something.
The power play is already 29th. It might as well be 30th. Whether it's 32nd or 29th, I think at this point is...
If you look at Detroit and the McClellan hire...
Yeah.
And the fact their power play was terrible and now skyrocketed, it's like coaching is definitely part of the problem with the power play. It's without a doubt. Like, the Flyers have enough talent to have a better power play than they do.
I agree, yeah.
Even though they have been better than last year, not just like percentage-wise. Yeah. They are less of a disaster and a momentum killer. Like, they were a complete net negative last year. Completely. Like, they would go on the power play and it would hurt them as a team. Now it's just kind of like a blunder, right? So maybe that is progress, but what are your thoughts there, Vasili? Does Rocky Thompson coach this power play again next year? Maybe he's even assistant, but do they bring somebody in or do they replace Thompson in general?
I can't see him coaching this power play again. I mean, I kind of said the same thing last season that I couldn't see it happening again, and it happened. So I don't want to,
that's why I say that.
Yeah, I don't want to say that that's a, foregone conclusion or anything. I just think at this point, you were dead last for 3 seasons. You're 29th in the league now.
Yeah.
You're looking at situations where you're in certain games, like, for example, where you could have potentially won if the power play executed or even, looked competent or put, any, sequences of extended pressure on the other team. So I think when you look at it from that perspective and actually, eking out results and, getting wins and things like that, like, you have to say, hey, it's a results-based business. This is stopping us from winning games ultimately in certain respects. So we kind of have to let you go. I think the PK not being, top 10 in the league, I don't think that has an effect, to be honest, or buys him any more time. I think the power play and PK are completely separate things. So you kind of have to look at it and say, hey, like, the power play's been so bad for so long here. So how can you actively say that after its 4th straight season of being, bottom 3 in the league, how can you actively bring a guy back, when you've had this much talent on the team, right? I think it's not a talent issue at this point. We can obviously see that. So I just think there has to be some sort of switch up, because you look at, other teams making switches and it's having an impact positively. So I think you have to look at it and say, maybe that could happen here, right? I think the penalty kill
that's a completely different situation in the sense that it has been good for 2 seasons. It's fell off a little bit here, but now we're kind of seeing it return back to its prior form where it's kind of been pretty good these last couple of weeks. Where the power play, I mean, other than the first couple of weeks to begin this season, it's been pretty abysmal, to be honest.
Yeah, it's been really frustrating, this whole power play situation.
You could argue just to end off, like, let's say the power play was 15th in the league instead of 29th. Would they have 3 or 4 more wins? And if they did, would they would be in a playoff?
The answer is yes,
So you
Vasili.
gotta look at it that way. You gotta look at it tangibly that way. So
100%, man, it's killing them. Having a complete ineffective power play for several seasons is killing them. Now maybe, but you think about it, and it's like, okay, so like let's say this team let's say Rocky Thompson gets like a superstar added to the team, and the power play moves up to 18th. Is that good enough? You know what I'm saying?
In my opinion, yeah.
Right, like if they add the talent, it's still average, right? That's my whole point. It's like, then you're only improving, and it's arguable that the only reason the power play is even really improved is because of Matvei Michkov.
Yeah, a 19-year-old kid or 20-year-old kid.
Right. So it's like, is it negligible, even the improvement in the percentage points? Where like, would you really be at 31 if Michkov wasn't here?
Oh, guaranteed, yeah.
Right. And you haven't
without
done
Michkov, they'd be
any
last
better
year,
on the exact. That's my point. So you've progressed none as a power play coach. And it sucks because I hate picking on him because I actually really like Rocky Thompson.
Hey,
and I think there are things he's done well.
And not to be negative completely on Thompson, like if you look at this Flyers team at 5-on-5, they are a good team this season at 5-on-5. Like
that's exactly what I'm saying.
A lot of the minutes at 5-on-5 this season, they've actually outplayed some teams, and they've lost in a lot of situations where they outplayed teams at 5-on-5, and the special teams fell short, unfortunately. Right?
I think this team needs to bring in a power play power play specialist coach. I think they needed to do it last offseason. They wanted to do it in-house. It's not working, guys. You need somebody to work with this power play. It's historically bad. Like, you have
very bad.
You can no longer say we can fix this in-house. You can't do
at this
it.
Point,
no one's buying it.
How can you look at 4 straight seasons? Well, 3 straight seasons of dead last, and then who knows where this is going to finish? It's possible it could finish dead last again, potentially. Like, I doubt it, but like, you're still going to be in the bottom 5. So you can't tangibly look at 4 straight seasons of just terrible results in the power play and say, hey, we're going to go with this again. Like, I just think from an organizational perspective, you have to look at it and say, this is costing us wins. We have to try something and make some sort of change, because whatever they're doing internally, it hasn't had an impact. So
the second unit is not even a power play unit anymore. It's just the third line.
Yeah, exactly. They just forecheck on the power play and try to put
with the number 1 defenseman and the number 3 defenseman.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Again, it just shows
not a good strategy.
I think it's okay, but it shows that there is no power play execution. They're just going out there like, you guys are good at 5-on-5, so go out there and do your 5-on-5.
But that's my point. Like, what's the strategy? Like, why aren't they? My thing still is just like, I think they've tried to do it with Michkov's unit more, or when he's on the ice more. But like, I still don't understand. Like, after years of not executing at a high level, like, why aren't they just running the power play from behind the net at this point? Because whenever they try to run it from the top of the blue line, it doesn't work, and they don't score a lot of goals.
I will say, I do think Drysdale has gotten better on the power play. His puck movement at the blue line, but it's marginal. I think he's also played better as well.
It's not. Yeah, I think in general he's just been better, but it's not having much of an impact. Like, I just think, like, you've ran this power play in a similar setup for these 4 seasons. Just like, try something different out of the box, because it's not working anyway. So like, if I was the coach, I'd say, hey, we're doing this umbrella setup. Let's do a reverse umbrella from behind the net. Try to feed pucks from behind the net out high into the slot and try to score goals that way, because the other schematics aren't having any success. So
yeah. So real quick, I just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Hit the notification bell for notifications to get notified when we release these episodes. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a like and a follow there. A rating and a follow there as well. That is the best way to support our podcast. Okay, so the question that remains after all of that is, are the Flyers still in a rebuild? So, been seeing a lot of people kind of question this. I don't know what the question is. I think it's quite obvious when you're the third youngest team in the league. You are refusing to add players. People keep wanting to associate a fire sale or the selling off of assets as a rebuild. And you can say whatever you want to me, but that is not what makes a rebuild. It is a culture change. It is the building of young assets internally. And again, with more cap space coming, regardless of the moves they make, they are still always heading in that direction. I think people are just incredibly impatient, understandably so. Losing and being mediocre sucks, but I think it's not your job to make these moves. I think, and we talked about it several times, that Briere has to be a little more patient than the average fan, obviously. But I think it's quite obvious that they are still in a rebuild and that they are doing it incremental steps, and they're going to do it their way, and they're mostly not going to be selling off all the assets at once, dumping their culture and starting from scratch all over again. And we've talked about it. If you look and follow the money, you can see of what their timeline is. There's clearly about 2 years left here of a wait job, right? We see the cap space opening up with the cap going up. So the combination of those two with the young players being refined, the Flyers will let you know when they're out of it, and most likely it'll be predicated with a large move to get a veteran player to come out of it. So it might not be tanking for 10 years until they get lucky and acquire 3 different superstars, but they are in a rebuild, and they're going to do it the way the Dallas Stars did it, you know? And yes, the Stars didn't win a cup, but if you look at like Wyatt Johnson and Jason Robertson, like those, right. These are not top of the draft players.
Heiskanen, Thomas Harley.
Well, Heiskanen was number 4 overall, so that's the only one.
But even like a Thomas Harley, right? Like
Jake Ottinger.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a pretty simple question. Our pretty simple answer actually to the question: are the Flyers in a rebuild? Yes. For anybody saying how could the Flyers be in a rebuild? They're not stripping down the team or trading every single asset they have.
That's a tank.
What? Yeah, exactly. And firstly, what team do you know or realize that has 6 upcoming draft picks in an NHL draft that isn't in a rebuild? I would say none.
Right.
I don't really understand the prerogative for people that are thinking that the team isn't in a rebuild. Like the GM's come out probably since he's been the GM, so this is his second year right now. There's probably been like 6 press conferences total, 7 press conferences he's had, and every single one he's stated, yep, we're, taking our time. We're in a rebuild. We don't want to, rush and make panic moves to make the playoffs one year. We want to build a team for the future to ensure that we are making the playoffs for years to come, and be a contender for years to come. And that's ultimately the goal, right? And I think for Philadelphia fans right now, they're just frustrated in the sense that the team hasn't been good for a while. There's been probably a decade plus here where they've been in mediocrity a little bit in a sense, right? Like there was that one playoff run in the bubble with Claude Giroux, and that was a really good team. But other than that, they haven't really been a team that's been a consistently good team since that Mike Richards era, right? Where that was the last era where this team was really making the playoffs for 5, 6, 7 seasons straight.
That was like more than 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, and I think people should understand that who was a part of that team. Yariv, who was on that team?
Danny Briere.
He was the GM, right? I would argue that he would, have a good insight into how to build a team like that, considering that he was a part of it. And he saw what Paul Holmgren kind of did in that situation. And that was also a team where
He was also part of a good Sabres team prior.
Oh, exactly. But I just want to make the point that Flyers team that was really good. Did they have any top 10 draft picks to build that team to make it a consistent playoff team?
No, not to build, but they did do the icing on the cake, which was Chris Pronger.
Exactly, but they waited for the right time to make that move. They didn't rush.
That was their Saquon Barkley in relative of the Eagles.
Exactly, but that team, they did it methodically. Sorry, guys. Yeah, that team and the way they built it, they did
Talking is hard.
I know, literally. Anyways, they did it methodically, and they had a lot of really good first-round picks that were, midway through the first round.
Yeah.
Late first-round picks, built that team up, and the Flyers, not to say that they're doing it the exact same way, but like look at all the draft picks they've acquired these past few seasons. Look at all these first round picks they're making. Like they're hoping that some of these guys are going to build into a team like that. And then you kind of make your additions through free agency and through trade with the assets that you have. I think we have to be patient in the sense that this regime, it's only its second year.
I know.
Like,
it's crazy how fast people lose patience. Understandably so. Losing sucks.
Yeah. Exactly.
It does.
Look at any team kind of deeming that they're in a rebuild. Do you see them kind of after 2 years of it being okay, it's over now? Usually it's a 3 to 5 year process. I would say for the Flyers, at the minimum, I would say for the Flyers, the later half of that 5 years here is probably not the case. I would say you're going to see them look to start making certain moves or start being more competitive, probably the third and fourth year. And we've kind of been saying that this whole time, right? Like follow the money. Look at when all, this money's coming off the books. It's happening this season, this offseason coming up, and the next offseason.
They still got to get rid of Peterson, DeAngelo, Hayes, and I'm thinking of somebody else. I'm forgetting. Atkinson?
There is somebody else. There is buyout for Atkinson. Ellis, too. You have to factor in as well.
Oh, right? Yeah, and that's never
so you just got to think, like, would a contending team be making buy now? Like, would a team be making buy now moves with all that dead money on the books? Like, it just doesn't make, like, they're not building a team to win right now. So, like, anybody asking for a trade right now, it's just not the case, right? Like, the offseason is the place where teams are going to restructure, make any of these big deals where you're kind of, making major moves. So if the Flyers are going to do anything, look for the draft, look for free agency, look for stuff like that. I get the frustration, but I just think there's an overarching plan here. They're obviously looking to accrue assets, kind of see what they have internally, then potentially make that big splash when it makes more sense, and this money comes off the books here. So I just think for the Flyers, are they in a rebuild? Yes, it's pretty obvious, but I wouldn't expect them to be in a rebuild here 2 years from now. I would say that upcoming here, there's going to be a chance for them to make some moves. I think at this point, they've really established a lot of draft capital, case in point, this upcoming draft. So there's going to be a chance even at the draft, potentially in what's available, to make a move or two. So we'll ultimately see. I just think people that are frustrated already have to understand that, Briere and his regime have, they inherited a mess from Chuck Fletcher, and they're just kind of now getting the cap situation back to where it needs to be to iterate and add more players. So I would just say, hey, it's been frustrating, but in a couple of years here, we're going to see a lot of moves made, I would estimate.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, let's do some NHL news. So first piece of news is kind of smaller news, but it is relevant. I just mentioned him like 2 seconds ago because we're still paying him. But Tony DeAngelo is back in the NHL. He has left the KHL, and he has signed a deal with the Islanders for the year, who have a horrendous power play. And he is going to be back in the NHL. So first of all, I just think good for Tony D. He played well in the KHL. And it was a little surprising he didn't get an NHL contract at all. I know a lot of people pretend like he's some kind of evil villain. I don't see him as an evil villain. I don't see him as a perfect player. And I don't see his game as being incredible, but he does have offensive skills that majority of defensemen in the NHL don't have. And, I would hope that as he's gotten older, he's learned how to manage it over time. So, yeah, welcome back to the NHL, Tony D.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting signing. I mean, think about the Islanders' power play, though. It's really bad. So I would say for their perspective, they're probably thinking, hey, let's get Tony D in here. Maybe he can boost our power play a bit. And they're still in the race as well, the Islanders. So I think, especially for them, and kind of a team that has certain players and veteran players and a lot more of a win now structure, they're probably hey, we need to make the playoffs here, right? So I think it's a move that they're making to try to salvage something with their power play. I mean, it's a positive thing for Tony D, man. I feel good for the guy in the sense that, yeah, I'm sure people thought his career was over. We on this podcast said, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually came back to the NHL. He is a guy that can produce points. I think for him to stick, though, going ahead, he's going to have to become a little bit more reliable defensively. So we'll see if he can kind of make that adjustment. But everybody's known, right? Tony D's always been a guy that if you need a guy that can run the power play and a guy that can produce points for you on the back end from that position defensively, he can do that. It's the defensive side of the game where the shortcomings are, right?
Yeah. So we're running a little bit long, so we're gonna skip the prospect section for this week. We'll move that stuff over to next week. We'll do some more prospect
It's
stuff
all
to make
good.
up for it.
The last 2 weeks we had some big updates, so we'll get it next time around.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll end on this last topic, and that's the big story that's kind of taken over the NHL, understandably so.
What a trade, right?
Yeah,
What a trade.
it's really fun to watch. So like when we're not part of it, I actually understand why people like, and this player in particular is incredibly enticing. Like somebody who people thought would never be available. You know, it's almost like a Leon Draisaitl getting traded. It is at least almost on that caliber of player. He's not exactly Leon Draisaitl, but he's like less
Top
than half a
five.
step away. Yeah.
Top 5, top 10 player in the league, 100%.
Yeah, definitely top 10 player in the league. At least statistically has been, and he has skill sets and size that, you know, everybody in Philly would covet. So Mikko Rantanen was officially traded to the Carolina Hurricanes. I'm going to go through the entire trade as a whole. So Mikko Rantanen was traded to the Carolina Hurricanes with 4.62 million AAV, 50% of his contract. As a cap hit, and then they also acquired Taylor Hall with the full $6 million AAV and Nils Juntrop as well. So that was a big addition for them, and potentially even big with Taylor Hall if he can kind of turn his career back around. He's had some injury problems of late. The Colorado Avalanche, in the process, in return, acquired Martin Necas at a $6.5 million AAV, which is very cheap.
Especially for the points he's putting up, too.
Yes. Jack Drury at a 1.72 million AAV. A player who has struggled in the NHL. They received a 2025 second rounder and a 2025 third rounder and a 2026 fourth rounder. The Chicago Blackhawks included in that, they obviously moved off of Taylor Hall, so they saved $6 million in their salary cap as well.
One thing to add before we get into it, Yariv, like I don't know what Chicago gets out of any of this. But
they received a third rounder and they eat the other half of the Mikko Rantanen contract for 1 year.
You think they would get more, right? I thought they would get at least a second, maybe, or something.
Well, I think the reason they didn't is because they moved Taylor Hall in that process.
Yeah, that salary also has to go to Carolina.
Right. So they, you know, you look at that for next year, they obviously lose the Rantanen cap hit because his contract will be renegotiated and they're not part of that new deal. And then they get $6 million left of cap space. So it does open things up. And again, this is why Briere doesn't want to do what he's doing and invest a guy, you know, like Taylor Hall, who's obviously a big name, towards the backside of his career, and then be stuck with a $6 or $8 million deal that he's got to find a way out of before his team is competitive, which is something Chicago did, where they tanked, tried to rush the process. Now they still suck. They still suck as much as they
have to find a way to get rid of that $6 million deal, right?
And they're also like the fifth oldest team in the NHL or something like that.
Yeah.
You're the opposite of the Flyers.
I mean,
so
what a trade, right? Like first thing for me is just it's refreshing to see because ultimately, like I can't think of a trade in the salary cap era that is really this impactful. I don't know. Like
it might have happened and we're just not remembering. But
it's refreshing.
It's got to be in the top.
It's refreshing in the sense that like when do you see players of this high caliber get swapped really for one another in terms of a Necas Rantanen?
It was the Huberdeau Matthew Tkachuk trade.
Yeah,
Huberdeau Weber.
Yeah,
Weber,
Uyghur. Yeah,
Uyghur. Thank you.
That's a big one. I mean, obviously, you have Joe Thornton gets traded a long time ago from the Bruins.
Yeah.
That's a super old trade, but like I just think recently, like you don't see these hockey trades of such high caliber top end players like this very often anymore.
Especially in the season.
That's what that is the main point
even crazier
I want to bring up is you don't ever see this happen in the season, especially in the NHL. Like in the NBA, you see a lot of trades like this happen, but NHL in season big trades like this is really, really, really rare. Like usually you will see big names move at the trade deadline, but it's for different packages entirely, right? It's going to be a contending team
team picking up a star player, and the other team is getting back draft picks and prospects and things like that. Like, to see two high-end guys that are arguably potentially on the same level. Like, you could say Rantanen's done it for a lot longer, but this is Necas's coming out party this season, right? Like, I believe he's top 10 in scoring. I think he has 55 points right now, 11th in the league. Rantanen's 6th in the league with 64 points, so it's really, really close. But yeah, it just doesn't happen often. I think it just brings a lot of fun into the game, right? Like, gets people excited, gets people talking. But ultimately, I think it just makes it more interesting when you see trades like this happen at a big scale with two really talented players. It just gets things, gets people interested in the game. But it just gets, people talking in general. There is, the topic coming up with the Flyers, and why weren't they involved in something like this, which asinine for me.
I mean, we don't know if they weren't completely involved.
Yeah, I just think, like, you got to look at these two teams and where they're at. They're both contenders, right? They're both obviously looking to swap talented
and
players.
And we know about Necas, the story with Necas, right?
Yeah, they're looking to swap talented players so they can both stay relevant and stay competitive. Obviously, Carolina's going for it with Rantanen here. I just think, like, you look at what Carolina trades for Rantanen, like, the Flyers would have had to trade Travis Konechny. And then if you did trade Travis Konechny and you did get Rantanen, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that deal because Rantanen's a better player than him. So yeah, do that deal if you can. But like, if you're the Flyers and you do that, like, you're just back at square one. Rantanen's a really, really good player for you. You have him. You're gonna have to sign him for $14 million, and then you don't have anybody else. You're gonna need to add a bunch of players around him. So
I do Rantanen probably is a better player than Konechny, but I do look at the type of seasons they're having and the type of season Travis Konechny is having, and the fact that he hasn't played with a guy like Nathan McKinnon.
It's very similar. Yeah, exactly.
It's just, I don't know how far, like, I know it's easy for us to love
I
Rantanen,
think he's better. I think he's better, but I don't think it's by a lot. And he's a winger.
Right. I don't think the difference is that big where the Flyers felt that they must make this trade. Having said that, I also love Rantanen. I would have been interested in this type of trade.
Of course, same.
But I don't know if the Flyers can afford to take on that large cap hit when they're trying to figure out what they're doing with their roster. Now, he is a franchise caliber player, so it is arguable. I do understand the frustration in this one, but it's not one that we were probably part of that conversation, and it does make more sense. I will also say I do think Colorado lost this trade.
See, I like it from Colorado's perspective too. I'm on the fence, man. I think for this one, it's a little bit different. Like, my thing for the Flyers perspective is, and I get why fans are frustrated, but like, ultimately, I think putting $14 million into a winger when you don't have a top line center, I don't think that's the best way to structure your team or build it. So I just think for the Flyers where they're at, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like, I think if Rantanen was a center, it makes a ton more sense because you need a first line center. So if you're gonna put all the money into that, then go ahead. But like, if you were to trade for Rantanen now and you have to pick up that new salary, you're going to renege and renegotiate. You're going to then have to add another top line center, and you might be paying, like, let's say you have to pay $12 million for the top line center, then you have to pay $14 million for Rantanen, then you have to pay $8 million for Michkov down the line or more, like it is when he re-ups, whatever. Like, it's just not the way to manage your roster and manage the cap. That's why people have to understand that it might not be the smartest move.
No, I agree with that, but I do think Rantanen's the type of player that is worthy taking. I don't know if I want to move Konechny, but he is the type of player that I want to take a risk on.
Yeah, of course.
Because it's like, I don't know if he's ever really, barring serious injury, obviously. I don't know if he's ever like a risky player to add to your team.
No, it's not risky in the sense.
I think the Necas situation opened the door for Carolina because they didn't know if they were even going to be able to sign him long term.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know like what was going to happen there. Firstly, and they're saying, "Hey, we might as well get Necas back. At least there's some control on our end and see what maybe might want to happen." Like for Colorado, right? Like they didn't know what's going to happen for Rantanen. They couldn't get to any sort of agreement.
He was shocked, right?
Yeah, he was.
Rantanen was shocked. I think he wanted to stay in Colorado.
Well, yeah, I think that he was ultimately looking to stay there. Colorado just couldn't pay him what he probably was going to get. And then they figured, hey, let's cut bait and get something similar value when we can. And people figure out because if they wait any longer, they're going to have to go to free agency with him.
Well,
right?
It's going to be
coming up. So.
It's going to be interesting because I don't know if the Casey Middlestat trade worked out for Colorado, with trading Bowen Byram, which was understandable trade, but the value wise, I'd rather would have Byron. In this case, I'd rather have Rantanen. That's kind of what again they did get assets back though, which they can wheel and deal with too. You know,
I would say for Natchez, like I think that there's a very high ceiling, a potential 100-point player. I think he's just kind of getting and scratching that surface this season. We're seeing it. I just think it makes Colorado a different look team. Like you could have
they're speedier.
Now. They're speedier, but I'm saying your center depth, like if you're planning to play Natchez as center, which he believes he is a center and wants to play there, and you have McKinnon and Natchez as a 1-2, your center problems they've been having are kind of over with.
Well, that was my point with the Middlestat trade.
Yeah, exactly.
That's he was supposed to be your number 2.
But now you have a really good top
which
three
is
there.
Important, yes.
Yeah, so like I think it's a different way to lay it out.
It's a ballsy move.
You could also put Natchez on the wing and have Middlestat be the number 2 too. So like I think it depends. I think they're gonna see what fits better, right? Like is Natchez better on the wing with McKinnon, or is it better for our team long term in terms of winning to put him at the center position as number 2 center? So we'll have to see. But that's why I don't mind it, because I think they've always had trouble at center. They were always kind of like this season being that one-line team almost, where like I think this gives them more of a balanced attack in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. We'll see what happens with it. I think it was a fair trade. Just I'd rather be Carolina. And this thing that sucks for the Flyers and all this is now Rantanen is in our division.
Yeah, of course.
For the next 8-9 years.
Yeah, if he signs with them, which I assume he will. Like I assume Aho and the Finnish connection there will probably help. But like you gotta look at
that's gonna be a dangerous line.
You gotta look at it from Carolina's perspective, right? Like think about their center depth. The reason they can make a big move, to add a guy like this is because they're secure down the middle, right? Like you have Aho, you have Jordan Stahl, like you have guys.
Stahl's got to be towards the end of his career, though, too.
No, for sure. But they're taking the stab at it this year. Like they're going all in.
Yes, they're going for it now. Yes, 100%.
Right, and like they've been,
and they wanted Jake Gensel, which they lost.
Yeah, exactly. And they've been a perennial playoff team for seasons. So like this is their time, right? Like you gotta look at it from the Flyers' perspective.
I think it was a good move for Carolina.
No, yeah, I do too. But bringing it back to the Flyers, like, why would they make a move like this? Like, this is like a move you make to put yourself over the top potentially.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree.
Like, so I just think like fans that are frustrated, they're just not at that point yet where you're going to be in on these types of trades. And I think if you were going to be adding these types of top echelon players that you're looking for the Flyers to add, it's going to be off-season type moves, right? Like,
yes,
I just think at this point, like, the center position is one to address. I think if you're going to see the Flyers make a big splash, it'll be for that center versus a winger. So that's why you look at Rantanen and you're like, why? It might not make a ton of sense. So I get the frustration, but I just think like it's not the move for them to make, but the move will be coming eventually. You're going to have to be patient, right?
This is the type of move that we're hoping the Flyers are able to make in a
couple of years from now. Exactly.
Yeah. This is what you and I have been talking about, is like that we hope that the Flyers are ready to grab that caliber of Rantanen type of player. Again, nobody thought Rantanen would be available. People keep saying,
but
like,
he is, exactly.
How are they ever going to do this? Something will open up, and they have to.
That's what I mean. There's a contract negotiation. A guy thinks he's not going to sign back. Or
a team thinks they can't sign him.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Like there people will say online all the time that, like these guys will never become available. They'll never get to free agency. Case in point, look what's happening right now. Like, come on, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's why people are frustrated too, because they're like, oh, this is rare. Why didn't you jump on this one?
But it will happen again.
Yeah. The thing is, when the Flyers are ready for Rantanen, it'll be 2 years from now, realistically. Yeah. And he'll be 30, and then if the Flyers trade for a 30-year-old and give him an 8-year deal, people are going to freak out and be like, he's already 30 years old.
You got to look at windows. You got to look at windows, though, right? Like you're not going to be trying to add these high-end talent players like this right now at this point, because you're not making a run right now at this point.
Yeah.
So I just think like a move like this becomes available for you when you're in that contending position. Fans might say, well, the Flyers need players like this to get there. But I just think they're trying to build that base themselves internally through their own draft picks, their young players, then add. Right?
It's the icing on the cake.
I think eventually you're going to get to that point. It's going to take some time, but that's
what Carolina is doing, right?
But that's what Carolina did do for years. Like,
yes. They built a core, a base. They got Aho in the second round, by the way. Not in the first round, not at the top of the draft.
And then they're using these assets over the years as they continue to add these young players to add other outside, assets. So,
and we'll see what there is for Jack Drury in Colorado, because he hasn't had that much success. He's like
could be a good change of scenery.
Yeah, he's a less successful version of Frost. Like, he's put up a fraction of the points of the NHL that Frost has. So I'm sure people will, if he doesn't pan out, maybe people will be frustrated there. But to know that at least they got Natchez, and those picks back, it was a very interesting trade. I understand all the perspectives with this one. I understand the frustration from people. I would love Mikko Rantanen. Let's be honest. We had a chance to draft him. We didn't draft him. We took Provorov instead. It's like, it's all shoulda, woulda, couldas, but like, it was a second chance to grab a guy that I promise you guys this, the Flyers love Rantanen. They loved him in his draft year too. They were just looking for a defenseman at the time, which shows why you don't draft by need, you draft by highest potential, which I don't think anybody really thought that Rantanen was going to be a 3-time 100-point player.
That's hard in hindsight to go back and make that armchair GM call.
And at the time, Provorov was slated to be like, excuse me,
bless you,
was slated to be like a Norris candidate, future Norris candidate type of defenseman. So it just shows how fluky these drafts are.
Yeah,
like, you can tell if a player is going to be a good player, but you can't tell how good of a player they're going to be,
Yeah, well, it's a wait and see. You got to see how they're going to adapt to their new situations, the NHL level. There's so many factors, but I think, just to wrap up the conversation in terms of Rantanen, like, it's refreshing to see a deal like that. Like, when's the last time you saw a trade like a huge impact trade like that happen in season? So I think that's the main takeaway for me, that like, I'd love to see more of that happen around the league. Obviously it's a rare thing, but hopefully we can see more cool trades like that happen. I think from the Flyers perspective, like, Flyers fans just need to be patient in the sense that it's been a while in terms of them being a consistent contender, but you have to look at the overall philosophy here. Like, it's the second year into this regime's tenure. It doesn't happen overnight when you're trying to turn a team that was consistently at the bottom of the league to being a contender every season, being a playoff team every season. So I think the team and the Flyers are doing it the right way here. It's frustrating that it's taking some time, but it's really only the second year. And I think we're in a position where the Flyers here in the next couple seasons, as money comes off the books, that you're going to see them add more outside assets, outside players, maybe use some of the assets they've accrued to add to positions of need that they need filled here. So
yeah,
I think, it's tough, but I just think that it's still the jury's out on Briere and the staff. Like, I still think they need time here to kind of
put their plan into effect. I still think it's the beginning of kind of what they're trying to accomplish here. So
yeah, and so far Rantanen has no points with the Carolina Hurricanes in one game. And
I'm sure that'll change quick.
and played a low amount of minutes, just under 19 minutes, where he normally plays 22 minutes a night.
Natchez also 0 points for Carolina, but
losers.
Like I said, these guys, I'm sure they're going to losers.
Pick it up. Yeah, I know. Obviously. All right, let's call it a show. Anything you want to leave our audience with, my friend?
No, just we appreciate all the support throughout the season. Obviously, we see our numbers, and everybody's really been tuning in and listening, and we love that, and we love to see that. So we appreciate that. We're going to continue to, bring the podcast throughout the rest of the season and the content on flyersnittygritty.com as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. We truly, truly appreciate it. Just echoing what Vasili is saying. Just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. If you have gotten this far in the podcast and you're not subscribed, please do so now. Hit the notification bell to get notified. Again, I'm in Israel for another 3 weeks. So obviously we're releasing on Sunday nights, I guess Sunday afternoon for you guys. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a rating and a follow there as well. Again, this is the best way to support our podcast, so please do those things. Also, a shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Shout out to Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company. and make it an easier process. And also a shout out to sportspider.com. They are an aggregator of all sports media content from around the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, and all sports. They bring everything, like podcast, videos, articles, everything in one place. And they are our partners. Our stuff is pinned at the top. Check out their link in the description. Make sure to check out sportspider.com. Okay, thank you everybody for listening. We love you guys, and remember, always stay gritty.